The wind came in low across the open land, dragging dust in thin sheets that whispered over the ground instead of lifting from it. It carried the dry, brittle smell of earth that had gone too long without rain, mixed with the faint iron tang of tools left out overnight. Nothing about the morning felt soft. Even the light came in hard, cutting across the plains in long, pale angles that made every shadow sharp. Ethan Hale stood bent over a fence post, one hand steadying it, the other wrapped around a hammer worn smooth at the grip. His knuckles were pale from pressure, his jaw set tight enough that the muscle flickered when he shifted his bite. He didn't rush. Every movement was deliberate. He checked the angle once, adjusted it by a fraction, then drove the hammer down. The strike rang out clean and flat. Wood answered with a dull resistance. Again. Across from him, Clara Whitlock watched. She didn't lean, didn't fidget, just stood there with her boots planted firmly in the dust, coat pulled close against the wind. Her eyes didn't stay on him long. They moved between the post, the ground, the distant rise beyond, and back again, measuring without needing tools. "You're off," she said. Ethan didn't look up. "No. 3 inches east." He drove the hammer again, harder this time. "Line runs straight." Clara stepped forward, closing the distance without asking permission. The wind caught the edge of her coat as she moved, snapping the fabric once before settling again. She crouched at the base of the post, brushing dirt aside with quick, efficient strokes of her fingers. "It runs wrong," she said. Ethan paused. "Not long. You had just enough to acknowledge the possibility." Then he leaned the hammer against his shoulder and watched as she cleared more of the soil. Her fingers hit stone, flat, worn, set deeper than the surface line would suggest. She tapped it once with her knuckle, then looked up. "This is your line," she said. Ethan's eyes dropped to the marker, then to the post. The difference was small, a few inches at most, but it was there, undeniable once seen. He exhaled once through his nose, then set the hammer down. Without a word, he gripped the post and pulled it free in one smooth motion, the earth giving just enough to release it with a low, dry crack. Clara stood, dusting her hands off. "You don't need a wife," she said, tone even, almost idle. Ethan gave a short breath that didn't quite reach humor. "Don't need one," she nodded once. "Good. I don't need a husband." Their eyes met. Not soft, not hostile, just direct. Something settled there. Not agreement, not yet, but a shift away from opposition. Ethan repositioned the post over the marker. This time, he checked the alignment twice before raising the hammer again. The strike landed cleaner, more certain. They moved on. Not together. Not yet. But no longer working against each other. Clara walked ahead, counting steps under her breath, marking distance in a rhythm that matched the terrain rather than any fixed measure. She stopped, turned, and pointed with her chin. Ethan followed, set the next post, and drove it down. The pattern repeated. Measure, place, strike. The sound of the hammer became the only sharp noise in the open space, cutting through wind and distance alike. After a stretch, Clara slowed, her gaze lifting toward the eastern rise. Something in the way the dust moved caught her attention, not the loose drift of wind, directed. She didn't speak immediately. Ethan noticed anyway. He set the hammer down and followed her line of sight. "See it?" she asked. "Yes." "How many?" He narrowed his eyes slightly, watching the faint break in the horizon. "3, he said after a moment. "Maybe 4. Clara nodded once. "They're not hiding." "No. That means they want to be seen." "Yes." She shifted her weight, looking back at the line of posts they'd set. Not complete, not weak either, just unfinished. "We don't have time to finish before they get here," she said. Ethan picked up the hammer, then set it back down again. "No, then we hold what we've got." He glanced at her. "You don't have to." She didn't look at him when she answered. "Neither do you." That settled it. They stepped away from the line, moving to ground that held firm underfoot, where the posts stood clearly behind them, visible, deliberate. The figures grew larger as they approached. With 4 men, spread wide enough to control space, close enough to move together. The one in front didn't rush. He walked like someone who expected the ground to stay where it was under his feet. He stopped a short distance away, letting the others settle behind him. His eyes moved from Ethan to Clara, then passed them to the line. "You've been busy," he said. Ethan didn't answer. Clara did, fixing what was wrong. The man's gaze lingered on her a fraction longer. "Didn't expect help," he said. "Didn't ask for it." A faint shift touched his expression. Not quite approval, not quite dismissal. "Land's open out here," he said. "Lines don't stay where people put them." Ethan stepped forward half a pace. "This one does." The man looked at him. "Because you say so?" "Because it was already set." Clara didn't move, but her presence held steady at Ethan's side, while the space between them balanced, deliberate. The wind pushed between both sides, carrying dust in thin lines that broke and reformed across the ground. The men behind the lead shifted slightly, testing angles. Clara adjusted with them, closing the open side before it could widen. The lead man noticed. You trust her to hold that?" he asked. Ethan didn't hesitate. "Yes." Clara's posture didn't change, but something in it settled deeper. The man nodded once, slow. "Then we keep this simple," he said. "You walk away from that line, we leave it standing. You stay, we take it down." Clara's voice stayed even. "Try." The word didn't rise, didn't harden. It just landed. The man watched her for a long second, then shifted his gaze back to Ethan. "You willing to bleed for it?" he asked. Ethan held his eyes. "Already have." Silence followed. Not empty, measured. Wind moved through it, carrying dust between them. One of the men behind stepped wider, testing a path toward the unfinished stretch. Ethan moved immediately, cutting the angle before it opened fully. Clara shifted at the same time, closing the opposite side. The group tightened, space narrowed. Control changed hands without force. The lead man saw it. His jaw flexed slightly. He looked at the line again, then back at them. "You're making this heavier than it needs to be," he said. Clara answered. "No, you are." Another pause. Longer this time. Because now it wasn't about movement. It was about decision. The man exhaled once, slow, controlled. "Last chance," he said. "Step back." Neither of them moved. Didn't need to. He nodded once, as if confirming something already decided, then stepped back. Small. Clear. The others hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then followed. The distance widened, not rushed, not reluctant, just accepted. The man turned slightly, looking back once more. "This line draws attention," he said. Clara didn't flinch. "Good." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "See that you're still standing when it comes." He turned. The others followed. Their figures shrank against the land, swallowed slowly by distance and light. The wind filled the space they left behind. Clara exhaled. "That won't be the last of it." "No," Ethan said. She looked back at the unfinished posts. "Then we finish it." Ethan picked up the hammer. "Yeah," he said, "we do." They walked back to the line together. Not because they had to, because somewhere in the space between resistance and choice, that had already begun to change. The hammer found its rhythm again. But it didn't sound the same. Before, each strike had been about placement. Now it carried something else. Weight, intent, a quiet defiance that settled into the ground with every blow. Ethan drove the next post deeper than the last, checking the angle once, then committing fully. The wood resisted, then gave, inch by inch. Clara moved ahead of him, counting steps under her breath, her gaze cutting between the posts already set and the stretch still open. She didn't repeat herself now. When she stopped, it meant something. When she shifted a mark, it was exact. 2 inches west, she said without turning. Ethan adjusted. No argument this time. The wind picked up slightly, tugging at loose fabric, carrying grit that settled against skin and teeth. It didn't slow them. If anything, it pressed them forward. They worked without speaking for a while. The line extended. Not perfectly straight to the eye, but true to the land beneath it. After a stretch, Clara paused again, this time not for measurement. She looked back over the ground they'd already covered, then toward the eastern rise where the men had disappeared. "They'll come back with more," she said. Ethan set the next post, then leaned on the hammer briefly. "Yes? Not just numbers?" "No." She turned to face him. "What does that mean?" "It means they won't test next time," he said. "They'll decide before they get here." Clara held his gaze for a second. Then we don't give them space to decide easy. He nodded once. That's why we finish. She exhaled slowly, then turned back to the line. Then we don't stop. They didn't. The work settled into something steady, almost mechanical, but never careless. Every post mattered now, not just as a marker, but as resistance, something that couldn't be moved without effort, something that made the next man think twice. Clara set another mark, then crouched, brushing the surface again. The ground changed subtly here, harder, packed deeper. This section holds better, she said. Ethan drove the post in. It resisted more, but when it took, it sat firm. Good, he said. She stood, dusting her hands again. You've done this long enough to know when ground lies, she said. He glanced at her. Yes. And when it doesn't? Yes. A pause. Where'd you learn it? Ethan drove another strike before answering. Working land that wasn't mine. She tilted her head slightly. And now? He didn't answer right away. He set the post, checked it, then said, Now it is. Clara didn't respond. But something in her expression shifted. Not soft, not impressed, just understanding. They moved on. The sun climbed higher, pulling heat into the ground. The air thickened slightly, carrying less bite, more weight. Sweat started to mix with the dust, settling into the lines of their hands, their faces, their clothes. Clara wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist, leaving a faint streak behind. How far? She asked. Ethan looked ahead, gauging distance. Another hour, he said. Then we'll reach the creek bend. Yes, she nodded once. That's where they'll try to break it. Ethan glanced at her. Why? Because water shifts ground, she said, makes lines easier to argue. He considered that, then nodded. Then we set deeper there. Yes, they pushed harder. The rhythm tightened, less pause between movements, less space for thought. Not rushed, but focused. When they reached the slight dip where the land curved toward the creek, the ground changed exactly as Clara had said, softer in places, uncertain under pressure. Ethan drove the first post there, but it didn't hold as clean. He pulled it back out, moved it half a foot, tried again. This time it held. Not just deeper, he said, smarter. Clara gave a faint, almost approving glance. Now you're learning. They worked the bend carefully, each placement tested, adjusted, reinforced. It took longer. It needed to. By the time they set the last post along the curve, the sun had begun its slow drop, the light softening at the edges. Clara stepped back, looking along the full stretch. The line ran clean now, not perfect, but undeniable. It'll hold, she said. Ethan leaned on the hammer, breathing steady but heavier now. It'll be tested. Yes. She turned toward the cabin in the distance. Then we don't leave it alone tonight. As he followed her gaze, no. They gathered what they could carry and made their way back. The walk felt longer now, not because of distance, but because of what had been built behind them, something that needed watching. The cabin sat where it always had, quiet, weathered, holding its place against the open land. Inside, the air was still. Cooler, carrying the faint scent of old wood and ash. Clara stepped in first, setting her tools down near the wall. Ethan followed, closing the door behind them with a firm push. For a moment, neither spoke. The shift from open land to enclosed space always carried something with it, pressure or release, depending on the day. Today, it felt like both. You take first watch? Clara asked. Ethan shook his head. We split it. She nodded. Fair. He moved to the small table, checking what little they had left. Water, some dry food, nothing more than enough. Not much, he said. Enough, she replied. They ate without ceremony. Quick. Quiet. After, Clara sat back against the wall, stretching her legs out slightly, eyes still alert despite the fatigue settling in. You always work like that? She asked. Ethan leaned against the opposite wall, arms resting loose but ready. Yes? No wasted motion. No. She studied him. Must have had to learn fast. Yes. A pause. Then, softer. Or you didn't last. He didn't answer. Didn't need to. The truth of it sat there anyway. Outside, the wind shifted again, brushing against the cabin walls in low, steady passes. Clara tilted her head slightly, listening. You think they come tonight? She asked. Ethan listened too, measured the sound, the absence of other sounds. No, he said after a moment. Why? They saw enough today. Oh, she considered that. Tomorrow, then. Yes. Another pause. One of the men behind him shifted again, less controlled this time. Impatience. Let's just move it, he muttered. The lead man didn't look back. Not yet. His eyes stayed on Ethan, then moved to Clara, then back again. You're both making the same mistake, he said. Ethan tilted his head slightly. Which is? Thinking this is about the line. Clara's brow tightened just a fraction. Then what's it about? The man didn't answer right away. The wind moved again, carrying the dry scent of the land between them. Control, he said finally. This stretch, this ground. Whoever holds it decides more than where a fence sits. Ethan nodded once. I know. Clara didn't look at him, but she heard it. Then you know it won't stop here, the man continued. No, Ethan said. More will come. Yes? And you still stand? Ethan's answer was simple. Yes? And the man looked at Clara again. And you? She didn't hesitate. Yes. That word landed heavier this time, because now it wasn't defiance, it was commitment. The man exhaled slowly, then took a step back. Not retreat, reassessment. You're going to bleed for this, he said. Clara's voice stayed level. Then it'll be ours. Another silence, shorter, because something had already been decided. The man turned slightly. Not tonight, he said to the others. A beat, back. There was resistance in the group this time, less willingness. But they followed. The shapes pulled away, dissolving back into the dark they'd come from. The sound of their movement faded slowly, replaced again by wind and open space. Clara didn't move, neither did Ethan. They held position until the night settled fully again, until the absence of movement felt real. Only then did Clara exhale. That was closer, she said. Yes. They're pushing the edges now. Yes. She looked down the line, barely visible but still there. Tomorrow won't look like today. No. She turned slightly toward him. Then we don't wait for it. Ethan studied her face in the low light. What are you thinking? We don't just stand here, she said. We make it harder before they come back. He considered that. How? She looked toward the creek bend. We reinforce the weak ground, set it so it doesn't shift under pressure. Ethan nodded slowly. That means starting before light. Yes. Another pause, then, quieter. You good with that? She asked. Ethan looked out over the dark land, then back at the faint line they'd built. Yes. Clara nodded once. Then we don't sleep much. No. They walked back toward the cabin together, not rushed, not relaxed, just steady. At the door, Clara paused, looking back one more time. The line held. For now. She stepped inside. Ethan followed. The door closed. Outside, the wind moved across the land again, brushing over wood and earth, carrying with it the sense that something larger was already on its way. Dawn didn't arrive all at once. It leaked into the world in thin layers, gray over black, then pale over gray, until the land started to take shape again. Edges returned first, then depth, then distance. By the time the sun crested low against the horizon, the fence line stood visible again, no longer a suggestion, but a statement. Clara was already outside. She had been up before the light, working the stretch near the creek where the ground had softened. The dirt there had been turned, packed, reinforced with stone and scrap timber they'd dragged in the night before. Her hands were raw, streaked with earth, her sleeves rolled high despite the cold. Ethan stepped out of the cabin, pulling his jacket tighter against the morning chill. He didn't speak right away, just watched. She moved differently now, more certain, less guarded in her motion, not because the danger had passed, but because she had chosen to stay inside it. You start without me? He asked. Clara didn't look up. You were still thinking, she said. I'm always thinking. That's why I didn't wait. He stepped down off the porch and walked toward her, boots crunching lightly over the hardened ground. The work she'd done overnight was already holding better than expected. The posts sat deeper. The earth around them was tighter, less likely to give. He crouched beside her, impressing his hand into the soil. Good pack, he said. Clara leaned back slightly, catching her breath. It'll slow them, she replied, not stop them. No, Ethan nodded once. But it'll make them choose where to push, she added. He looked up at her then. And where they choose, we meet them. She finally met his eyes. Yes. A brief silence passed between them, not empty, just measured. Then Ethan stood and turned his attention down the line. We should extend this reinforcement another 20 yards, he said. If they test again, it won't be in the same place. Clara pushed herself up, rolling her shoulders once. Then we don't give them a clean second option. They moved together without further discussion, falling into a rhythm that didn't need explanation. One dug, the other set. One hauled, the other packed. The work was heavy, but it was clean, direct effort with visible result. The sun climbed slowly, pulling heat into the ground, drying the surface layer while the deeper soil held firm. By mid-morning, the reinforced stretch had doubled. Clara wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a faint streak of dirt across her temple. They'll notice, she said. Good, Ethan replied. She glanced at him. You want them to? I want them to understand this isn't shifting, he said. She studied the line again. And if they bring more? Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for the next post, driving it deeper with controlled strikes, each hit precise, measured. When he finished, he rested the hammer against his shoulder. Then we adjust again, he said. Clara let out a slow breath. That's not a plan. It's the only one that works. She didn't argue, because she knew he was right. Out here, plans didn't hold. Only responses did. The wind shifted slightly as the morning wore on, carrying a faint scent that didn't belong to dust or dry grass. Clara noticed it first. She straightened, eyes narrowing toward the far ridge. Ethan followed her gaze. What is it? He asked. She didn't answer right away, just listened. Then, faint, distant, movement again, different from the night before, heavier, less cautious. They're back, she said. Ethan nodded. Earlier this time. They're not waiting for dark. He set the hammer down carefully. No. Clara's jaw tightened. How many? Ethan watched the horizon, measuring the shifting shapes as they crested into view. More, he said. She let out a quiet breath through her nose. Of course. They stood there for a moment, letting the distance close enough to read intent. The group moved with less restraint this time. No attempt to hide, no slow testing, just forward motion. Clara stepped toward the line. Ethan moved with her. They've decided, she said. Yes. The figures approached until they were clear. 6 now, spread wider, more confident. The same man at the front. He stopped just short of the reinforced section, eyes scanning the work they'd done. Well, he said after a moment, you've been busy. Clara didn't respond. Ethan spoke instead. Didn't want you wasting time. A faint smile touched the man's face. Appreciate that. He nudged the ground lightly with his boot, testing the firmness. Stronger, he admitted. Yes. The man looked up again, but not unbreakable. Clara's voice came steady. Neither are you. That earned a brief, sharper look from him, then a small nod. Fair. The men behind him shifted, less patient than before. One stepped forward slightly. We're not talking this out again, he said. Clara's eyes flicked to him. Then don't. Ethan shifted his stance just enough to align fully with her. No space between them now. The lead man lifted a hand slightly, stopping his companion from moving further. Easy, he said, but his tone had changed, less measured, more edge. You've made your point, he continued. You can hold for a while. Clara didn't flinch. That's not what we're doing. No, he asked. No, she said. We're staying. That landed. Different from before. Final. The man studied her for a longer moment this time. You don't even own this land, he said. Clara's answer came without hesitation. I'm standing on it. Silence followed. Tighter now. Ethan could feel the shift again, the point where talk started to lose value. The man saw it too. His gaze moved between them once more. You're forcing this, he said. Ethan shook his head slightly. You're choosing it. That was enough. The man stepped back half a pace. Move it, he said. The group spread, not rushing, but not holding back either. Clara moved instantly. intercepting the same weak angle they'd tested before, only now it wasn't weak anymore. Ethan closed the center again, forcing the pressure outward. One of the men reached the reinforced ground and pushed. The post didn't move. He pushed harder. The soil held. Clara stepped in close, stopping the motion before it could build. "Not here," she said. The man hesitated, just for a second. That was all it took. Ethan shifted toward the next gap, cutting off the second attempt before it formed. The group stalled, momentum broken. The lead man watched it happen, jaw tightening slightly. He stepped forward again. "Enough," he said. The others paused, reluctant, but they stopped. He looked at the line, then at Ethan, then at Clara. "You've made this harder than it needed to be." Clara's voice stayed even. "So have you." Another pause. Then the man exhaled slowly. "This doesn't end here," he said. Ethan nodded once. "I know." The man held his gaze a moment longer, then turned. "Back," he said again. This time the group followed faster. Less argument, more recognition. They pulled away, retreating across the open ground, their figures shrinking back toward the ridge. Clara didn't relax, not yet. She watched until they were gone from sight completely. Only then did her shoulders drop slightly. "They'll come back again," she said. "Yes. And next time?" Ethan looked down the line they'd built together, then back toward the horizon. "They won't test," he said. "They'll try to take it." Clara nodded slowly. "Then we stopped them." He glanced at her. "You're still here." It wasn't a question. She met his eyes. "I said I would be." A small pause, then quieter. "You still don't need a wife?" she asked. Ethan let out a short breath. "No." She tilted her head slightly. "Good. A beat." "Because I don't need a husband." He almost smiled. "Good." They stood there for a moment longer, the line between them no longer just distance, but something held, something built, not named, not yet. The wind moved across the land again, carrying the weight of what was coming next, and neither of them stepped back. The afternoon dragged slower than it should have, not because there was nothing to do, but because everything now carried weight. Every movement, every decision sat heavier, like the land itself was waiting to see which way it would break. Clara worked the line with methodical precision, reinforcing where the ground still felt uncertain, checking each post with her full weight, testing for give. There was less talking now. Not silence, just fewer unnecessary words, the kind that get used up early before the real pressure sets in. Ethan moved farther out, scanning beyond the ridge, not expecting to see them yet, but not trusting that they wouldn't come sooner. "They pulled back too easy," Clara said without looking up. "They didn't," Ethan replied from a few yards off. They adjusted. She drove the heel of her boot into the dirt beside a post, compacting it harder. "That's the same thing," she said. "No," he answered. "Pulling back means doubt. Adjusting means intent." Clara paused for a second, then resumed her work. "Then they've made up their minds." "Yes." The wind shifted again. Oh, warmer now, carrying a dryness that scratched the back of the throat. It brought no sound this time, no early warning, just stillness stretched thin across open ground. Clara straightened slowly, rolling her neck once. "You ever walk away from something like this?" she asked. Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he crouched, pressing his hand into the dirt like he had that morning, feeling the hold, the resistance. "Yes," he said finally. She glanced at him. "And?" He stood. "It stayed with me longer than if I hadn't." Clara let that settle. Then she nodded once. "Good," she said. "Then we don't do that." Ethan looked out toward the ridge again. No. The sun dipped lower, dragging long shadows across the land, stretching the fence line into something sharper, more defined. The kind of light that made distance deceptive, closer than it looked, but farther than it felt. That was when he saw it. Movement, not subtle this time, not careful. "Clara," he said. She was already turning. "I see it, more than before. 8, spread wider, faster, no attempt to hide." "They're done testing," she said. Ethan nodded. "Yes." She took a step toward the line, then stopped, looked at him. "This is where it shifts," she said. He met her gaze. "It already has." A brief pause, then she moved. They took their positions without discussion. No wasted time, no hesitation. The group approached quickly, boots cutting across the ground with purpose. Dust rose behind them, hanging in the air like a trail that refused to settle. The lead man was still at the front, but the tone had changed. Even from a distance, it was clear. No more conversation, just action. They reached the line and didn't stop. One of them moved straight for the reinforced section. Clara stepped in, fast, intercepting before he could get leverage. "Not here," she said. He didn't answer, just pushed, harder than before, testing force, not ground. Ethan moved to the center as two more split wide, trying to open space. He cut one off, clean. The other hesitated just long enough for Clara to shift and close the angle. Momentum broke again, but only for a second. "Push through it," one of the men barked. They tried. All at once this time. Force over precision. Clara felt the strain in the ground beneath her boots, the pressure building where they leaned into the posts. The reinforced section held, but barely. "Ethan," she said, low. "I know." He shifted closer, reinforcing her position without stepping in front. The man in front drove his shoulder forward. The post creaked. Clara's jaw tightened. "Back off," she said. He didn't. So she stepped closer instead, closing the distance, forcing him to choose between the post and her. He hesitated. That was enough. Ethan moved, redirecting the pressure away from the weakest point, forcing the push to spread out where it couldn't concentrate. The line held, but just. The lead man stepped forward again, closer now than he'd been before. "This ends now," he said. Clara didn't step back. Then end it. Something in that answer shifted the air, the kind of moment where everything narrows. Focus tightens, no more room for negotiation. The man moved, not toward the post, toward Ethan, fast. Clara reacted instantly, cutting across, intercepting before the movement could land. They collided, not clean, not controlled, just impact, force meeting force. Ethan stepped in a fraction late, but not too late, grabbing the man's arm, stopping the forward drive. Everything tightened at once. The rest of the group surged. No more angles, no more testing, just pressure. Clara planted her feet, holding ground she had no intention of giving. "Hold it," she said through clenched teeth. "I am," Ethan replied. The line strained behind them. The ground shifted slightly under repeated force. Not breaking, but warning. Clara felt it, adjusted, lowered her center. Why, it forced the man in front of her back half a step. Ethan used that shift, pushing outward, redirecting momentum away from the posts again. Seconds stretched. Every movement counted. Every inch mattered. Then, a break. Not the line. The men. One of them stepped back first. Just a fraction. But enough. The rhythm broke. The push lost cohesion. Ethan felt it immediately. "Now," he said. Clara drove forward, not to chase, but to reclaim space. The others followed their first hesitation, stepping back in uneven sequence. The lead man pulled free, breathing harder now, eyes sharper. He looked at the line, still standing, then at them, still there. A long moment passed, then he laughed once, short, dry. "You're stubborn," he said. Clara didn't answer. Ethan didn't either. The man shook his head slightly. "This isn't finished." "No," Ethan said, "it isn't." Another pause. Then the man stepped back fully. "Move," he said to his group. This time there was no argument. They pulled away faster than before, not retreating in panic, but leaving without testing again. Clara stayed where she was until they were well beyond the ridge. Only then did she move. Just a step, then another. Then she stopped. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, from release. "That was it," she said quietly. Ethan nodded. "For today." She looked at him. "That's going to cost us." "Yes." A longer silence, then she exhaled slowly. "Still worth it?" Ethan met her eyes. "Yes." The sun dipped lower, dragging the last of the heat with it. The line stood, not untouched, not untested, but held. Clara looked down its length, then back at him. "You still don't need a wife?" she asked again, quieter this time. Ethan shook his head. "No." A small pause. Then he added, "But I'm starting to see the use." Clara let out a faint breath that almost passed for a laugh. "Careful," she said. "That sounds like a mistake." "Probably is," he replied. She nodded once. Good. Another pause. Then, softer. Because I don't need a husband either. Ethan's mouth tightened slightly. Yeah. They stood there as the light faded, the land settling again into shadow. Between them, something had shifted. Not claimed, not named, but no longer avoidable. And out beyond the ridge, where the ground dropped into darkness, the sense of unfinished business lingered, quiet, patient, and certain to return. The night that followed didn't bring rest. It brought quiet, not the easy kind. The kind that sits too still, like something has already passed judgment and left the air holding it. Clara stood outside the cabin, not sitting this time. She couldn't. Her body hadn't settled yet. Every muscle still held a trace of the strain, like the ground itself had pushed back through her. The line stretched out in front of her, dark against dark, hard to see, easy to feel. Behind her, the door creaked softly. Ethan stepped out, slower than before, one hand brushing the frame as if he needed the contact. "You should sit," he said. She didn't turn. "If I sit, I'll feel it more. You're already feeling it." She let out a short breath. "Yeah." He stepped beside her, not too close, close enough. For a while neither spoke. The wind moved across the land, but lighter now, less like pressure, more like movement without intent. "You think they're coming back tonight?" she asked. No. That answer came quicker than usual. She glanced at him. Why not? Because they already tried what they came to try. She studied his face. And they learned something. She looked back out at the dark. So did we. That sat there, different than before, quieter, not sharp-edged anymore. After a moment, she shifted her weight, then finally lowered herself onto the step, slower than she would have earlier. Careful, Ethan noticed. "You hurt?" She shook her head once. "Nothing that matters." He didn't push it. But he didn't look away either. She flexed her hands, staring down at them, dirt still under the nails, skin scraped, knuckles faintly swollen. "They almost took it," she said. Ethan didn't correct her. "Yeah." She nodded once, like confirming something to herself. "I felt it give, but it didn't." "No," she said, "because we adjusted." He leaned back slightly against the post beside the door. "That's all this ever is," he said. "You adjust fast enough or you lose it." She looked up at him. "And if you can't adjust?" He held her gaze. "Then you shouldn't be out here." That answer didn't land harsh, just honest. She nodded again, slower this time. "Good," she said, "because I'm not going anywhere." "I know." That came just as steady. Another pause settled between them. Longer now, not empty, just full of everything that hadn't been said yet. Clara looked back out at the line. "I've held ground before," she said, "but not like this." Ethan didn't interrupt. Before, it was just she searched for it, staying in place, enduring, waiting something out. Her jaw tightened slightly. This wasn't that. "No," Ethan said quietly. "This was choosing it," she went on, knowing it was going to push back, knowing it might take more than I had, and still stepping in. She finally looked at him fully. "That's different." Ethan nodded once. "Yes." A beat. Then she added softer, "I didn't plan on doing that with anyone. That one stayed in the air. Longer." Ethan looked past her for a moment, out at the land, like he needed somewhere to put the weight of that before answering. "Neither did I," he said. Clara watched him. "Then why didn't you walk me off when I showed up?" He let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but without humor. "I tried." "You didn't try that hard." He glanced at her. "I didn't want to. That landed." She didn't look away this time. "Why?" Ethan took a second. Not to think, to decide how much of the truth he was willing to leave out. Then he didn't leave any of it out. "Because you weren't asking to be carried," he said. "You were already standing, just in the wrong place." Her brow tightened slightly. "And now? Now you're in the right one." Silence. Not awkward, not strained, just real. Clara looked back down at her hands. "They said this would cost us." "Yes, you believe that?" "I do." She nodded slowly. "Good." He looked at her again. "Why good?" She lifted her eyes. "Because anything that doesn't cost something usually doesn't hold." That answer sat solid. He didn't argue it. Couldn't. The wind shifted again, brushing past them softer now, carrying the faint scent of dry earth cooling under night. Clara leaned back slightly, resting her shoulders against the step behind her. "You still don't need a wife?" she asked. The words were the same, but the tone wasn't. No edge, no challenge. Just asking. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said. She nodded once. "Oh, good. A beat." Then he added, "But I was wrong about what that meant." She didn't speak, waiting. "It wasn't about needing someone to handle things," he said, "or fill a gap." His voice stayed steady, but lower now. It was about not wanting to depend on anything that could leave. That one hit deeper. Clara's expression shifted, just slightly. Not surprise. Recognition. "Yeah," she said quietly. "That sounds familiar." He studied her face. "And you?" She let out a breath, slower this time. "I said I didn't need a husband," she said, "because every time I leaned on someone, it turned into weight." Her fingers curled slightly against her palm. Something I had to carry instead of something that held. Ethan didn't interrupt. But this? She gestured faintly toward the line, toward the land, toward everything behind them. This wasn't that. "No," he said. She looked at him again. This was two people holding the same thing. The words settled. Simple, but heavier than anything before them. Ethan nodded once. "Yes." A long pause followed, the kind that doesn't ask for anything else. Clara pushed herself up slowly, wincing just slightly this time, but not enough to stop. Ethan noticed. Didn't comment, just shifted closer to the door. She stepped past him, then paused with her hand on the frame. "You still don't need a wife?" she asked again, quieter than before. He almost smiled. "No," she nodded. "Good." Then she added, just as quiet, "Because I don't need a husband either." He leaned slightly against the frame. "Yeah." A beat. Then, "But I don't think either of us needs to pretend anymore." Clara held there for a second, then gave a small nod. "No." She pushed the door open. Warm light spilled out, soft against the dark. She stepped inside. Ethan followed, stopping just inside the threshold for a moment, looking back out at the land. The line held, not untouched, not unchallenged, but earned. He closed the door. Outside, the wind moved across the ground again, steady, quiet, and without resistance. And for the first time since it began, nothing pushed back.